everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Clan Chattan Association YouTube channel. And back by popular demand, one of my all-time favorite guests, and for those of you who have yet to meet him, is the one and only Philip Beddows, Clan Seanachaidh for Clan MacBean, and one of our dear friends, and probably one of the best historians that I actually have the pleasure of, maybe I could say, knowing at this point. And I have asked Philip to come on and talk more about the Battle of the North Inch. Now, this is a battle that's always fascinated me. There's a lot of conflicting information that comes from different places, but I think we can all agree upon that the Mackintoshes were involved in this battle, which is why I'm wearing my Macintosh tartan today. So this will be the first installment, most likely of a few, as we dissect different manuscripts, get more information and more histories about this battle, and as we take a deep dive into the Battle of the North Inch. Please help me welcome one and only Philip Beddows. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Please, let's give a thanks to Philip Beddows. Thanks for tuning in again on the Clan Chattan Association YouTube channel. And I always say back by popular demand, but you are in demand, Philip Beddows, Clan Seanachaidh for Clan MacBean. Hopefully I didn't butcher that again. I can never figure these
No, it's perfect.
Good. Thank you for taking the time yet again. I know you're very busy, and we do so appreciate all of your time and attention. And there are those of us who are just really looking forward to hearing from you. And I asked you, and I know you were a little apprehensive to talk on the subject of the Battle of the North Inch, because it has always intrigued me. There are so many stories out there about it. Sir Walter Scott wrote about it, although I don't think correctly. And so I thought, what better person to ask about the Battle of the North Inch other than yourself? And even though, you know, we don't have complete information probably from any one source, and there's many discrepancies, maybe you and I can pick this apart, or I can listen to how you have researched it. And you know, what do you think, Philip?
Well, Cindi, I think I was actually just looking on Google Maps just to refamiliarize myself with the landscape of the location of the North Inch in Perth, where this great battle of the clans took part, or the Battle of the 30, as we call it in Clan Chattan. 30 people on each side, and a gladiatorial contest to the death on this patch of ground along the River Tay, just outside Perth City in those days, or now enveloped by it, in the presence of the king and his court, a whole structure built I mean, it was like an enormous boxing ring for this gladiatorial contest. Absolutely extraordinary. And that 1396 this took place, and we've actually got proof of it in the Chamberlain rolls of the in the royal records in Scotland, because there's actually a note about credit being taken for a sum of £14, 2 shillings and 11 pence for timber, iron, and the erection of the lists for the 60 persons fighting on the Inch. An Inch was sort of an island. It's probably marshy ground on one side, and the River Tay on the other, or, you know, may literally have once been on an island in the river, but, you know, for quite some time afterwards not, but retained the island name. So it happened, and it was something remembered as being a pretty bloody, brutal affair, where only the defeated side, only one individual survived and escaped by swimming across the River Tay, and I think 11 of the winning side survived, but obviously pretty wounded, probably all of them. And it was arranged to settle a dispute which seemed impossible to settle, and such that there were calls for it to be sorted out by the king, and the king decided that actually that he would gather them at Perth and ask them to each choose 30 champions to fight to the death. Winner takes all. So it's been recorded in multiple chronicles, multiple histories, and almost all of them failed to agree on who took part. And I was thinking, how on earth, Cindi, are we going to reach a conclusion on this when no historians have really seemed to reach a conclusion, although there are some generalities. It's a very, very confused picture. And coincidentally, as I was looking on my Google Maps, I saw being advertised a jewelry business called Pandora in Perth City. And I thought, goodness, we're opening the sort of the warlike Pandora's box of total confusion that we will never put the lid back on again.
Maybe not. And before we really launch into it, I will let you know that I personally have, and who am I? You know, I don't really have the background or the authority or the credentials to make an educated decision on this, but I am, I've learned through my training, let's just say loosely, in law school. I'm not an attorney, but I can be a great debater. And I'm going to make a case for one possible conclusion, maybe a bit later on. I will make the case for one particular clan because it makes the most sense to myself.
Okay.
Why the king would have gotten involved. But at any rate, I won't derail us and go there that quickly. But did you want to explain to the viewers why, you know, there's so much controversy regarding this famous Battle of the 30 and why nearly every account of it we can find, no one can really agree on who it was against. We know it was Clan Chattan, the Mackintoshes, perhaps. They say at least some McPhersons, and somebody was saying Davidsons, but
Yeah.
what is your
well, one thing's for sure is that the winners were Clan Chattan. Okay, I think we can definitely conclude that, and it's, you know, it's a strong tradition, and the historians of Clan Chattan definitely agree it was Clan Chattan in whatever format that were the winners, and they were one of the parties, and that of course the old Moy Hall used to have tapestries which recorded some historical moments of particular significance in the history of Clan Mackintosh and Clan Chattan. And one of these was the Battle of the North Inch, which I think I'm right to say, you'll know better than me, Cindi, that the tapestries no longer exist. I can't remember whether they disappeared in a fire or something, but there is a painting that's that replaced this particular scene, and you see the combatants, and you see the rails where they were that created this, as I say, like an enormous boxing ring, to make sure that nobody could escape, and they had to stay within the ring. and the stand where the king was sitting with his court and spectators, almost exactly as one would have seen in a gladiatorial contest in the circuit in Rome long ago. They used to do similar things. So it was just an extraordinary event, really. So the question is, what is it that would have been such a major issue that the king would create such a gladiatorial contest in a desperate attempt to say, right, you guys, you're causing mayhem. This is never going to be settled. So we're going to have a gladiatorial contest, 30 of your champions against 30 of the other champions to the death. But the other thing is, why is the other side so unagreed upon by so many historians?
I don't know. I can't figure that out either. And that is where the controversy lies. But I have theories about who I think it probably was, and I'll give you the case of why, but this is the big controversy about this battle. I love Sir Walter Scott's writings, and everybody, pretty much Sir Walter Scott is a household name. Would you agree? Everybody,
Yes.
he was born in 1771, lived to be 1832, I believe, something to that effect, and wrote a great many things. There's a monument in Edinburgh to Sir Walter Scott, and what a wonderful writer, poet, but he also considered himself a historian. And there's been a couple of instances that we know of where he's written about accounts of Clan Chattan that have been incorrect. And I do believe this might be one of them. And he wrote about the Battle of the North Inch and the Fair Maiden of Perth. And his account is otherwise known as Valentine's Day. His account is very romanticized. In addition to not really knowing what clan exactly was fought against Clan Chattan, there is this Henry Wind. When the Clan Chattan or the Mackintoshes came forward and they were short one, there was another gentleman who did step in and fight, known as Henry Wind in the Kinrara, or Sir Walter Scott wrote about it being Henry Smith. But there's so many ideas around that particular character and the reason why he stepped in. And, was it because one of the Mackintoshes fell very ill, which is in the Kinrara, versus he had spent the night before with a maiden and ran off with her the next day or something. So there's so many accounts as to why that one person wasn't able to show up, in other stories. However, the Kinrara is saying it was due to illness, but I don't know. There are a lot of different accounts, but shame be upon Sir Walter Scott. I shouldn't say that. For he's a novelist by his own accounts, and he liked to call himself a novelist, a poet, and a historian. However, being a novelist and a historian at the exact same time and putting that forth to his readers, people would assume he knew what he was writing about and maybe took that as fact, when, many times historians, as you and I know, are writing things and it's not always fact. We find something else. We talk about that here on this channel all the time.
So Walter Scott, Cindi, would you share with everyone who Walter Scott said this battle was between?
Sir Walter Scott suggests in this novel that he wrote that the Scottish nobles were fighting for control because of the weak Scottish monarchy.
Well, that is interesting, because actually that is a a wider Scotland context. Graham Mackenzie covers, actually. He makes the point that, you know, what was going on that would create such an issue for everybody. And actually there was, yes, the weakness of Robert III.
Sir Walter Scott wrote about this in actually a romantic novel of his, The Fair Maid of Perth, otherwise known as Valentine's Day. And he speaks of this battle being between Clan, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's Queule. But when you look up that clan, it is associated with Clan Cameron, as so far as I can tell. Have you been able to find anything about that, Philip?
So now this is where it all goes back to. What the early chronicles called these battling clans, and people's understanding of what those names represented. I was reading a letter from 8 years ago in one of the Scottish newspapers that was saying Gaelic is the key to the understanding of the epic clan battle. The writer goes straight in here and probably get slightly mixed up themselves, actually, thinking. So they were saying that they conclude by saying it was the Davidsons who fought the Macphersons on the North Inch of Perth, and that the Camerons never reached the North Inch until September 1745. He gets it all completely wrong, really. And this was one of the beliefs, that it was between the Macphersons and the Davidsons, and the reason people thought that was that in the years running up to 1396, in 1370, there was the Battle of in Veravon, and that place spelt Inverna Haven, if you want to spell it phonetically, and that was the home of the Davidsons in Badenoch. And it was the Camerons who'd come over the hill into Badenoch, and they were facing up against it was all over a cattle raid, facing the Mackintoshes with the rest of Clan Chattan, including the Davidsons and Macphersons. And there was the famous disagreement between the Macphersons and the Davidsons over who should have the right of being in the pride of place in the lineup in the battle, and on the right or the left wing. And the Davidsons were given the honoured position, and the Macphersons were so upset about this slight that they decided to just sit out the battle. And the battle got going, and the Davidsons took it really badly, suffered a lot of casualties, and the Camerons were basically winning. A bard was sent to go and rile the Macphersons and shame them into getting back into the battle, and sure enough they did, and the Camerons were beaten. But the problem is that the Davidsons suffered massive casualties and blamed the Macphersons for it, for sitting on the sidelines. I think I've got that right, and anyone can put their comments underneath this video to tell me otherwise.
It's in the about that, and
yeah,
and it was the chief of the Mackintosh went at night, later that night, over a campfire, and I guess he had had a little bit to drink, and taunted the Macphersons about, you know, how they could have done that. And so he stirred the Macpherson up to a place and to a point where they went immediately in the dead of night and then slaughtered the Camerons.
yeah.
That's
So
kind of the Canrara anyway.
So some people say that this dispute between the Macphersons and Davidsons was what led to this, and that the clan Clan Kai. One of the names given to the opponents was Clan Die, as it were. Clearly the Davidsons beat, some said, and therefore the other lot were the Macphersons, and that's what it must have been. But that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that would have just been an internal Clan Chattan argument going on and disgruntlement, and that wouldn't have brought in the Kingdom of Scotland, the king and all his nobles. It just wouldn't. It just isn't conceivable. So the question would be, well, what was going on? Now, the big dispute that had been going on and rumbling was that ever since Angus MacIntosh married Eva, the heiress of Clan Chattan, daughter of Gillipatrick, son of Dougal Dahl, or as some people would say, she was the daughter of Dougal Dahl, son of Gillipatrick, but I think her father was Gillipatrick. That's the line I would follow with some of the genealogies, and comes from better authorities, including Kinrara. And you would have thought Kinrara would not really get these details wrong. He was very particular about being thorough with his work. So that rumbled on, and what happened, this may have relevance, is 1335, John of Islay, who later became Lord of the Isles, gained the lordship of Lochaber from Edward Balliol, who at that time was ruling Scotland. But of course, he then had his fall later on in the sort of 1350s, 1356, 57. After John of Islay gained this lordship of Lochaber in 1336, William Macintosh, Angus's son, in the lifetime of his own father, so Angus was still alive, he died. Angus didn't die until 1345, but William got acknowledgement of his right to the old Clan Chattan lands of Glenloy and Lochaber from John of Islay. Now, John of Islay, he was, of course, related to Angus. He was Angus's uncle, so he was William's great uncle. So this was a bit of a family affair, because Angus MacIntosh, who married Eva, was the son of Farquhar MacIntosh, who married Mora, the sister of John of Islay. And it was their father, Angus Og, who was the ancestor of the Lord of the Isles. So then what you had is that in 1347, you find William Macintosh getting a new lease of Rothimercus from the Bishop of Moray by Inverness. Edward Balliol falls, and then David II comes into play, and William Macintosh gets a charter of Glenloy and Lochaber from King David in 1359. And then he gets a later charter from the Lord of the Isles in 1366, reconfirming the lands that he had given to him by King David II, or that he held from him. And then William dies in 1368. His son Lachlan becomes the next Macintosh captain of Clan Chattan. And then it's 2 years later that we have the Battle of Invernavan, or Invernavan. So then the following year, 1371, King David's reign comes to an end. And what happens between 1396, when the Battle of the North Inch takes place, and 1371? Well, quite a lot, but there might have been something of particular relevance here. In 1392, there was what they call the Great Raid of Angus. So on the throne at the time was Robert III and his brothers, Alexander Stuart, Lord of Badenoch, and Robert Stuart, Earl of Fife, were competing for power in the kingdom. Robert seemed a little weak at that time. So there was lots of thought politics going on. And this big raid into Angus appears to have come by way of Lochaber. And it was by Duncan, son of Alexander Stuart, the Lord of Badenoch. And it was directed at Duncan's father and uncle's brother-in-law and the king's brother-in-law, David Lindsay, who was an ally of the Earl of Fife. So you probably lost me at this point. I'm almost lost myself. Lochaber politics came into Perthshire, Angus, and their warriors in this competition between the Lord of Badenoch and the Earl of Fife. And among those that were put to the horn for this, the Cattarans put to the horn, were people whose name appears as one of the combatants in the Battle of the North Inch. So it seems this competition between these two royal princes and their followers could have become a sort of Highland, Lowland, East-West competition of power politics, and that this, therefore, the combatants may well have been proxies for the combat between the royal princes. That might be a reason why this became such a big issue, because you would have thought that the king would maybe he would think, well, there's a lot of battle and feuding going on in Lochaber, but it's a long way away, and maybe they can just continue that, and as long as it doesn't come into the rest of Scotland. But it was clearly affecting elsewhere. So that's maybe a little bit of context there, and that might just add even more confusion. But the battle gets covered in various chronicles, and the first one it gets covered in was by Andrew Winton around 1420 to 27, and in his original chronicle, which is ancient form of Scots, and so and he gives the battle. This is where we're going to lose the pronunciation here, Cindi, because these names are really pretty difficult. But that he says that it's that it's a sort of clan cool, as far as I can see, or it may be depending on whether the Q is QWHEWYL, whether that's a hard Q, so it's Cool, or as appears in other records, Kevel, or whether it's a soft Q, it might be Clan While in some way, against Clan Kai, but he spells it differently, and that this was led by somebody called Shaw, which is very suggestive, obviously. It says more. Walter Bower, the abbot of Inchcolm, in his Scottish Chronicle in the 1440s, says that it was Shaw Beg and Clan Kai against Christy Johnson and Clan Cule, or Clan Cule, however you want to pronounce it. And then in John Major, in his British History, comes up in 1521, published in Paris, of all places, comes up with that it's a weird name. It looks like Stecubus, which is I think it's just a misreading of Shaw, and Clan Kai against Christy Johnson and Clan Clwyd. So very, very, very confusing. And then Hector Boyce, or Boethius, as some people have him, again in Paris, in 1527, which John Bellenden then translated, has he has the same thing as John Major, follows John Major, but Bellenden's translation, who was Canon of Ross and Archdeacon of Murray, he has Clan Kai against the Clan Chattans. So that's quite interesting.
That's
and then John Leslie, the Bishop of Ross, in 1578, in translated by Father James Dalrymple in 1596, comes up again with Clan Kai being the winners against Clan Hatton.
that's kind of crazy. And I have never seen anybody recount that somebody else won this battle.
Yeah, but actually, as we'll come to see in this conversation, if we can ever reach a conclusion on it, it seems that the Clan Kai bit, fighting Clan Hatton, actually, that's actually one and the same side in the battle. So they've missed out the opponents completely. So John Leslie got a bit mixed up, but it's not surprising. Everyone can be forgiven for getting mixed up because it's so confusing. If you read Kinrara, so we are going to have a look at Kinrara, and I'm going to read what Kinrara wrote. Okay, this is the
This is what I'm reading as well.
So he makes a link, and so do others, that this was a follow-on from the Battle of Inverhaven in 1370. It may or may not have been. But what was going on in Lochaber and the competition there appears to be a factor. So Kinrara writes, this having occasioned a calmness for a long time betwixt the two families. Afterwards, in 1396, there happened a cruel feud between the Clan Hatton and the Clan Kai, which he says a branch, as we have by common tradition, of the Commons. Oh gosh, that throws another confusion into the mix, which troubled the adjacent countries very much for a long time, till at last the controversy was decided in a manner as follows. It was accorded by both parties by the mediation and instigation of the Earl of Crawford and Murray, who were sent by the king to oppress or pacify these unruly clans, that 30 persons on each side should fight before the king and his nobles on the north inch of St. John's Town, that's Perth, without any harness or armour, but swords only. Both parties met upon the appointed day and place before the king and the judges. The fight was cruel and followed to such rage and desperate fury that all of the Clan Kai's side were slain, one only excepted, who to save his life, after he perceived all his fellows slain, leapt into the water of the Tay and swam over and so escaped. 11 of the Clan Hatton escaped with life, yet all were very sore wounded. Of these 11, the pre-mentioned Shaw Mackintosh, alias McGillicrist, Vicaean, the captain was one. It is observed that at the entry of both parties to the field, one of the Clan Chattan having fallen sick, as we were saying earlier, there was one amongst the beholders called Henry Wynd, reported to have been a saddler, who, being sorry that so notable a fight should fail for want of one to supple the vice of the sick person, offered himself to make up the number, and so the fight began, in which none behaved himself more valiantly than he, and was one of the 11 that survived. They say that the family of Clan Chattan of the Smiths descend from that Henry Wynd. So he's sometimes called, I think, Henry the Smith or Henry Gow, the Smiths and the Gows being that. We don't really know. Other people say that the king offered a large sum of money and also other inducements for somebody to volunteer to make up the last man on the Clan Chattan side. So it wasn't just Henry Wynd saying, how unsporting that the fight won't go ahead for lack of a man. So, and then Kinrara goes on, having said it's, a branch of the Commons against Clan Chattan, he then goes on and says, but some old manuscripts bear that the party that was overthrown by the Clan Chattan in the conflict were of the Clan Cameron, and the Boetius Major and other historians that call them the Clan Kai have so written by misinformation. But whatsoever of them it was, this is most certain, that the fight was most cruel and was followed with such eagerness and rage that nec minor spectantes horror, quam pugnates fure tenebat. That is to say, that the very spectators were struck with so much horror and fear as the fighters were with madness and fury. After this fight, the Clan Chattan gave a new heritable bond of service and man-rent to the said Lachlan Mackintosh, their chief, because they prospered so well under the happy conduct of his cousin Shaw Mackintosh, aforementioned, and Lachlan gave to Shaw the possession of the lands of Rothimarcus for the valour he showed that day against his enemies. So there you've got it. Kinrara says, well, whoever it was a pretty nasty affair, and even the spectators were full of as much horror as the people battling.
Well, and you can imagine, and they had no shields or armor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we're and I if I may interject my own thought here. And because also I found actually just today on the Clan Cameron organization website, they lay claim to this battle as being the other side as well, and being that it's mentioned that that clan, the Queele, and then you had another spelling. I think they most likely that would be the same reference. That is tied to Clan Cameron, perhaps an ancient name of Clan Cameron, but they lay claim to it as well in here. And that would have put them at right about 90 years of a 360-year feud. 90 years into that feud. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because reading through the Kinrara and going through this feud and the history of this feud, it was an absolute murderous bloodbath. And just the things that the sides would do to each other constantly. And it was over the lens of Lochaber and the Tor Castle there, which by right belonged to the Mackintosh and Clan Chattan captain. And each, we talk about this each and every time. You said possessions 9/10 of the law. Clan Cameron would never leave, even though they only won one battle in the entire 360-year feud, and were always commanded by the kings to pay a sum of money to the Mackintoshes over this land and the castle. They never did. Finally, it was paid by the Earl of Argyll at the time in 1666, finally paid the ransom and ended the feud. But however, I digress. It talks about throughout the histories and in the Carrara how King Robert III perhaps was not the strongest of rulers. And this bloody feud embroiled many times. You see throughout this history, embroils sometimes nearly half of Scotland, of people taking sides. So you have this feud in the Highlands where you have the whole half of Scotland perhaps taking sides. And with a kind of a weak king ruler, you can only imagine how unstable that must have felt for a king. And in examining some of the other clans who they suggest might have been, the Davidsons and the Macphersons over that one battle.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. It makes more sense that this feud with the Camerons just was growing into this, what could have wound up, if it was allowed to continue at such a pace, maybe a civil war in Scotland even, or in the Highlands. And so they really, I think the king wanted to really come in and get my personal thought and feeling, just as a disclaimer, probably wanted to get a handle on this feud so that he didn't lose more power that he already didn't have, and put an end to it. And maybe by making a spectacle of it, and being there and present for it, was able to assert some authority over this matter where he had little probably authority. It talks about that he would hear of this feud while he was at court, and he would send emissaries and people to go try to settle it on his behalf, and it just never worked. And so he knew it was getting out of control, and perhaps was afraid if this was allowed to be continued. And then interestingly, real quick, on the Clan Cameron site, they don't suggest that. They suggest that you can read through this, it's really kind of fun. They don't really say, when they wind down the fight, the battle was fought between the opposing clans so bloody and furious that the king and spectators were seized with an inexpressible horror. Of course, the Conrara says this. 4 of the Mackintoshes survived the battle, but mortally wounded is what they say, although there was purportedly 11, and then the only one Cameron survived. The miserable victors were in no condition to prevent him from swimming over the Tay River. So it's fun how they put it in the light. But the battle was orchestrated to end tensions between the 2 rival clans. It's kind of how they put it, but it did actually nothing to eliminate the ongoing feud, which of course went on another couple 150 years.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, that if it was simply the Camerons, it wasn't it didn't conclude the feud at all, and the feud had begun really. So it began when the Mackintosh moved north, out of Lochaber into Badenoch, first of all. And of course, they had the lands up around Inverness at Petty and Connaught, and the Camerons were holding the land. And the claim was, well, yes, but we have this land. You need to pay us as tenants. But of course, they said, well, you've deserted the land. But actually, the important thing is that Clan Cameron itself was a confederation of clans and families that included families and clans that had once been part of the original old historic Clan Chattan, the people that hadn't gone up into Badenoch or up into Inverness. So amongst those, the key ones were the McMartins of Letterfinley and the McGillaneys of Strone, and the McGillaneys also at Errock. And those 2 McGillaneys became the Camerons of Strone and Camerons of Errock. But there were other Clan Chattan families around and about. And the thinking is that what really happened is that first Cameron, it's a little bit confusing, and if one goes back to the 1467 manuscript, which was this old pedigree or series of genealogies. And looking at that, there is a genealogy of the McGillaneys that is put together with the genealogy of the Camerons, and they're presented as a sort of joint genealogy. Now, Dr. Ronald Black and his wife Mari, who did magnificent work on 1467 genealogies, and Ronald Black has actually written a number of articles about the Cameron genealogy. And what you have is the founder, or said to be the first Cameron chief on record, is Donald Dew, Black Donald, I guess it is, but he's called the son of Alan, but he seems to fit in the genealogy as the son of Mullany, like McGillany, another way of saying that, but the way it's written, as Black details, that one can see that there's a break, because it doesn't say he's the son of that chap. It's just that it flows onto that. And so Black's thinking is that actually what seems most likely is that this first Cameron, son of Alan, actually married a daughter of this Gillany, and that therefore it was he was probably, he says he's probably a bit of a local hero, a little bit like Alistair MacCola 2 centuries later, and that that he became the captain of almost like a mini Clanhattan that gathered up the people that didn't follow Mackintosh, along with some others in the area, and that a lot of them all took the name Cameron.
Well, they would have protection, correct? I mean, not everybody would have been able to retreat to Rothy Marcus.
No, and so people would say, well, hang on, Mackintosh, you've disappeared. But there was this long conflict, and when Angus and Eva's son William became captain of Clanhattan, he fought what Kinross calls a great battle at Drumgloy in Lochaber. We don't have a date for it, but he fought it against Donald Dew, McEwen, Vikian, and that gives the genealogy that is in the 1467. It would appear, and that William was victorious, and that he continued having battles, and so it just sort of rumbles on, and but there is another rather interesting theory. A.M. Mackintosh, in his history, the Mackintoshes and Clanhattan, goes through all the various records, including John Major, then a doctor at the Sorbonne, and debates it all, and then he comes down to finally the John Leslie's account, Bellington's translation, giving Clanhattan with a form of that name, but it's all getting very confusing. But he does actually then, he also mentions the fact Raid of Angus in 1391. He gives 1392 elsewhere, that the Wolf of Badenoch, this is Alexander Stewart, Lord of Badenoch, defeated the forces led by the Sheriff of Angus and Sir David Lindsay of Glenesk, and that he takes the clan there that took part from Lochaber, being Clanhattan, led by Shaw. That appears to be what he's suggesting. But even A.M. Mackintosh, he goes through pages and pages as a whole chapter on this. But that he does conclude that that it was Clan Hatton against Clan Cameron. But he goes round and round the houses on it, and does find it difficult, but he does get the setting of the wider court politics in Scotland at the time, and the fact that this was actually an influence on it all. And so that invasion and raid on Angus, that would have really upset a lot of people. And to have a lot of wild Lochaber men charging into, you know, across Perth and into Angus. And this could be why also Perth was chosen, apart from the fact it was, you know, there's a royal residence there. They just thought, let's bring these people back to where they caused a lot of the trouble, bring them all out of Lochaber and sort it out, but that they were proxies for this battle between the royal princes of Fife and Lochaber and Badenoch. So I think that's probably it. But Graham Mackenzie, in his wonderful book Gillicattan's Posterity, we've mentioned Graham quite a few times, and his book is called Gillicattan's Posterity, and the subtitle Macmillans, Macphersons, Mackintoshes and Camerons and the Great Lochaber Feud. And he puts in a new proposal, well, not entirely new, because it had been suggested by one of the Macmillan historians, Reverend Somerled Macmillan, in 1952, who wrote a book called The Macmillans and Their Septs. And he proposed that the clan, as we've been trying to say, Cúil or Keevil or something like that, that these are the Lochaber McEvoyles. I'm probably saying that wrong. This equates to the MacKilvols, which is a name for the Macmillans, or that particular family of Macmillans. And that these people, there is a tradition that they were actually on land in Lochaber that was that into the 18th century, they and the McGillanes were on lands which had once been part of the inheritance of Eva. And that his proposal is that actually these Cúils or Wiles or Keevils or Machiavels, however you want to say it, against the Clan Kai, that the Clan Kai was actually Clan Hatton. So it was what Graham is puts across in great detail is that it's actually the Macmillans from Lochaber who were the people fighting effectively as representatives of the captain of Clan Cameron against Clan Hatton. Now, and that it was really about the great competition for the lands that they held. The significant thing of this is that if one goes back to the old genealogies, and at this I'm going to page back and find the right one here. These Macmillans were actually members of the old Clan Hatton.
I remember you mentioning this before. That's what I was going to ask about.
So what you've got here is, and they descended, according to the manuscript by Ardross, Kenzie of Ardross, manuscripts 1687 in number, that they actually descended from Eva's father, Gilpatric's brother, Gillispec, who had two sons, according to the Ardross manuscript. One, Gilpatric, and the other, Gillimal. And that Gillimal had four sons, and from them come these Macmillans of Lochaber. If you go back on Ardross's genealogy, Gilpatric and Gillispec were two of the sons of Dougal Dall, okay, who was the son, according to Ardross, of Gillicattan McGillispec. And in this genealogy, Dougal Dall has a brother called Muirach, from whom the Macphersons descend. So this actually puts the Macmillans as a senior male line of Clan Chattan who would have a challenge to the inheritance of Eva passing through a woman to her husband, Angus Mackintosh.
Wow.
So this might make some sense here.
Wow, and that line became part of the Clan Cameron, and this, do you think that
Yes, so that Clan Cameron, what they managed to do, this Donald Dhu, managed to pick up the bits of Clan Chattan that hadn't followed Mackintosh, and I say, and the likelihood is that he married a daughter of the McGillanes, an heiress of the McGillanes, an equivalent to Eva, and he could have been a forceful personality and warrior, as suggested earlier, like Alistair McCullough, and that these Macmillans were so affected by the loss of their men at Perth, and then in a later problem that occurred, that their numbers became so depleted that their identity became lost. It's sort of, I'm simplifying hugely, but this does appear to make some sense, and it does say here that in Graham Mackenzie's history, he takes a particular source that talks about Macmillan going to Perthshire and settling in Lawers, and so that there was some of this family settling over there in that part. So and that the Macmillans were later expelled, and that that they were defending their interests in Lochaber, having been thrown out of Perthshire. But
how interesting.
will we ever really know? I mean, it's a very complicated situation, but that this old feud would make some sense, because these Macmillans of Lochaber were, as I say, originally part of the old Clan Chattan, of the male line of Clan Chattan, and later joined up with their McGillany relatives as part of Clan Cameron.
Well, and if
And
you
then
eat into why they feuded, I never knew this part of the history. I don't know how many people watching did either. We had that question on the channel not so long ago about how is it that Clan Cameron could have ever been part of Clan Chattan, but in this way. And this makes so much more sense looking at the map, Philip. We were talking about that. Look at the map, they were all in there together. They were there with the commons. Everybody was right there in a very not very large geographical area. You could drive this perimeter in a half a day's time of where these lands are.
Yeah.
But this makes more sense, and actually, I hate to say this, gives Clan Cameron more clout of to why they feuded for so long. They felt that they had an actual right, not just because of the vacancy that was left by
So
the.
the etymology of the name of the people that Clan Chattan were against, it fits with the Macmillans' old name in Lochaber. That's the point.
That's fascinating.
So I think Graham, I mean, he's picking up on the work of Somerled Macmillan in the 1950s, and he does get a little bit mixed up himself. But as we said earlier, we all get very
It's hard to follow.
tied up by all these lines of inquiry and the claims. But actually, it makes a lot more sense. And Graham lays it out very, very well in his Gillicattan's Posterity. And one can see there's an etymology of the name that goes right back to the earliest chronicles from the 1400s, which is not, which is a very short time after the event, 1420s. This is only just over 20 years later, 20 to 30 years later, and Winton is actually recording these names, and that fits. And it fits with why the Mackintoshes should have been fighting against the Macmillans, and they were each representing the Mackintoshes, led by Sean Mackintosh, probably with a variety of people from across Clan Chattan, but mainly the Mackintoshes from Badenoch. McPherson's would have been there as well. There's no tradition of it in Clan MacBean of anyone being involved, but who knows? There might have been Davidson's there. We just don't know. But what we know is it's the Mackintoshes and Clan Chattan against. I think Graham's put his finger on it. The Macmillans of Lochaber representing the old Clan Chattan claims that were inherited as a feud by the Cameron leadership that pulled together what became Clan Cameron.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then what's going on with the Macmillans coming into Perthshire and then being evicted from Perthshire, and the competition between the royal princes, Fife and the war for Badenoch, it would all seem to fit that there was court feuds going on, that it just so happened this Lochaber feud managed to connect completely onto it, and these two opponents in the battle were proxies for what was a royal, or you could almost say a battle royal.
Yes, they couldn't fight it themselves. And then the Camerons further suggest on their site that only 30 were taken because the king didn't want what otherwise would be his armies of Scotland, being depleted over such. So he chose 30 of each side, so that ultimately these large clans and their armies wouldn't be so depleted. But it's all very, I overuse the word fascinating, but it is, and I've really wanted to delve into this with you, and I know I wasn't sure if you'd wanted to do sort of a deep dive, because there's not a recording of Clan MacBean. However, the MacBeans were with Eva from day one, or Ava from day one.
Yeah.
And I could surmise they were so close that they were still with the family at that point. But at the same time, I cannot wait until we can get Graham on, and I don't know, maybe a discussion between yourself and Graham, and I'm just somewhere in the background or recording it for you, because
I think it would be great if we can and we're taking Graham's name in vain again.
yes, hi Graham.
But but Graham, you're becoming a legend on this YouTube channel. But no, we'll I think that would be great to have to get us together and to do a follow-on where Graham can expand on his research and thinking, because he really has covered it in the best detail of any historian that I've read, and he does come to a conclusion that makes a great deal of sense in every way. And I think that would be interesting, because actually he also would have some really interesting detail to share on the origin of Clan Chattan and how these different families came together to form the clan. So at the same time, Clan Cameron. So that would be great, I think, as a follow-up to this, if we can arrange it. So what a big promise we're making to people who are watching and listening to this.
We've got to, sooner rather than later, I hope. And also someone from Clan Cameron, just to have the whole person, and to start from the earliest of time of what we know. I know that someone has it down. But it'd be really,
I think it's rather lovely to actually just bear in mind that there was this incredibly the longest running feud in the history of Scotland, over 300 years, between the Camerons and Clan Chattan. But if you see it in the light of being originally a family feud over inheritance between different bits of the original Clan Chattan, following on from the inheritance through Eva, through a woman, that this is quite remarkable. But of course, Clan Cameron and Clan Chattan did come together on a number of occasions to fight for the king, and of course they became firm allies in the future, and there were multiple intermarriages between the families, and so we are great friends today.
yes,
and we have been fought and died alongside each other in multiple battles, not least and most famously at Culloden. But lovely to think that through all this, actually we are kin.
Yes,
we are kin. We share a common root in our stories, and certainly although our roots connect, even if we don't know precisely how, but we do know that they connect in both place and lineage. So we share, our blood is mingled with each other over centuries, and so it would be great to get somebody from Clan Cameron together.
We'll do it. We'll get that. I'm so appreciative again of all of your time and your patience, and looking all of these things up. I have a feeble and knowledge and not as much resources, but this has always been so intriguing to me, as to piece this together, and just even today, hearing more about the Macmillans, and that they had come from the original Clan Chattan, would have felt, I'm sure, that they had a right to the lands in Lochaber.
Uncles, it would be her first cousins,
her
father's brothers. Through her father's brothers,
Yes,
but actually, there's an interesting twist, which I shall leave as a tempting hint, that there's something quite potentially interesting about all of this and the MacBeans that we haven't touched on yet, but might be quite intriguing to touch on, just in this context, this wider context of the Camerons and the Clan Chattan.
What is that?
Oh, we're going to save it.
Oh, we're going to save it. Okay.
Oh yes, we're going to leave people in with bated breath on the edge of their seat.
Oh, they should, as one does. So we can find out the next time. Oh, Philip, it's always a great pleasure. And you inspire me to, when we're done here, to go and read more and learn more. Thank you so very much.
Pleasure, as always.
I hope these sessions aren't impeding too much on your normal
No,
life.
no, fine,
We certainly are
fine.
grateful. We are very grateful because this
No,
was
it's great, and I mean, I think we managed to get to the end of that. We haven't drowned in the River Tay in
no,
the confused waters of the battle and its story, and
no.
we haven't been enveloped by the waters of the Tay. So we're here still on dry land.
We've got to get the camera inside of all this. Just reading on their website, it's quite funny. You know, they make mention that the one of the 30 Mackintoshes didn't show up because he was afraid, out of fear. You know, it's funny how each side puts their little spin on. But we won't drown in the Tay. Well, thank you so much.
All right.
All the very best to you, and let me know our next discussion.
Yeah, we'll fix another date
That'd be great.
to follow on.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's good to
Bye.
see you.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.